The war had ended, but Europe still trembled as if the earth itself remembered the bombs. In June 1945, the air in western France was thick with dust and surrender. Smoke still rose from the ruins of Caen and Le Havre. Rail lines twisted like broken bones, and the echoes of church bells mixed with the groan of trucks collecting prisoners. Among the columns of weary soldiers were women, hundreds of them, wrapped in gray field jackets and carrying satchels that once held ration cards and radio manuals. There had been clerks, typists, weather reporters for the Luftwaffe, and factory assistants in a collapsing Reich. Now, they were captives, though most were too tired to care. When U.S. military trucks pulled into the yard outside Rouen, few of the women looked up. They expected the same as others had told them. Vengeance. America, one of them whispered, is where they'll make us disappear. Rumors were currency in 1945, traded like bread. Some claimed the Americans handed prisoners to the Soviets. Others swore they sent them to coal mines. None imagined the truth, that they were bound not for punishment, but for the prairies of Kansas and the valleys of Texas. The Allied officers moved efficiently, ticking off names from capture rosters. The youngest among them, barely 18, clutched the corner of her sleeve, hiding a tattoo from an air defense unit. The oldest, 37, had been a radio operator in Munich and still spoke with the clipped authority command, though her voice shook. The Americans treated them with the same blunt practicality they gave to all prisoners. You'll be processed. You'll be fed. You'll work. The word sounded almost merciful after years of air raids and scarcity. On the docks of Cherbourg, the Atlantic wind carried the smell of salt and diesel. A Liberty ship, built in Baltimore and painted a dull gray, waited under the harbor cranes. The women boarded under guard, silent except for the clatter of their wooden shoes. One American sergeant noted in his diary that day, they looked more like ghosts than enemies. He wasn't wrong. Malnutrition had hollowed their cheeks, and war had stripped away vanity. Yet, beneath the exhaustion, something else lingered, a quiet defiance, the instinct to survive. Below deck, the air was hot and sour with engine oil and sea salt. They slept in hammocks strung beside crates marked U.S. Army supplies. At night, the hum of the engines drowned the memory of bombs. For many, this was their first time seeing the ocean. A few whispered prayers into the dark. Others stared at the faint glow of cigarettes above them, tracing every breath of the guards who watched in silence. When dawn came, they gathered on deck, shielding their eyes from the glare. The horizon was endless. For a brief moment, it felt like freedom, until they remembered they were crossing as prisoners. Days stretched into weeks. An officer translated camp rules. Under the Geneva Convention, prisoners would be fed, housed, and protected. The phrase protected drew confused glances. They had lived through years where protection meant hiding from their own government. Still, the Americans kept their word. Food was plain, hard bread, tinned meat, weak coffee, but it was regular. On the fifth morning, a woman from Dusseldorf wept quietly as she held a piece of white bread in both hands. "It smells like peace," she said. As the ship neared Halifax, the chill of the Atlantic gave way to the sweetness of land. Canada was the first glimpse of the New World. Forests without bomb craters, skies without searchlights. The women pressed against the railings, staring as if the shoreline might vanish if they blinked. Their next journey began by train, rows of black cars with the letters U.S. Army Transportation Corps stamped on the sides. Windows were barred, but the doors were open enough to let in the scent of pine and soil. Across the border, America unfolded like a dream painted in wide strokes. Rolling green hills, barns painted red, fields of wheat stretching beyond sight. The passengers watched in silence. One woman whispered, "So this is where the airplanes came from." She didn't mean it with hatred, only wonder. The trains cut across Illinois, then Kansas, clattering through small towns where children stopped their bicycles to watch. Few locals knew that inside those cars sat former enemies, German women who had once monitored Allied planes on radar screens. At the camp gates, the soldiers expected resentment. Instead, they found curiosity. Wooden barracks stood in neat rows, surrounded by barbed wire and American flags. There were guard towers, yes, but also basketball hoops and small gardens tended by other prisoners. A signboard read Camp Concordia, U.S. Army Prisoner of War Camp number 108. Behind the fence, a few German men were already at work chopping wood. They waved awkwardly when the trucks rolled in. Processing was methodical. Names recorded, uniforms exchanged for denim work clothes, personal items cataloged. When one young woman surrendered a photo of her son, the American clerk slipped it back into her pocket and said softly, "Keep it." The gesture startled her more than the gun on his belt. Humanity, after years of propaganda, felt dangerous. The first night in Kansas was eerily quiet. No sirens, no artillery, only the chirping of crickets beyond the wire. The sky was immense, littered with stars so bright it hurt the eyes. Some prisoners couldn't sleep, unsettled by the silence. Others lay awake whispering about what kind of people these Americans were, who built fences but fed prisoners well, who spoke loudly yet laughed easily. In the morning, the sun rose over cornfields that shimmered gold. The camp loudspeaker crackled to life, calling for kitchen duty, cleaning detail, and medical checks. Trucks arrived from nearby farms carrying crates of produce, potatoes, onions, and unfamiliar yellow ears of corn. Most of the women didn't yet know that soon those golden fields would give them a taste of something no propaganda, no ration, and no ideology had ever provided: genuine kindness. But that would come later. For now, they remained silent behind a fence, caught between guilt and hunger, between a lost homeland and a land they did not understand. Letters home were still forbidden. The war was technically over, but peace had not yet arrived inside them. When the evening whistle blew, the guards gathered near the mess hall, smoking and laughing as the women passed by in groups. One of them, a tall sergeant from Oklahoma, offered a small nod to each. It was nothing, a reflex of politeness drilled by habit. Yet to the women, it was strange. No one had looked at them that way in years, without suspicion or pity. As night settled, a warm wind swept across the plains, carrying the scent of distant harvests. The women sat on their bunks, thinking of home and wondering what awaited them next. They didn't know that the next morning, when the kitchen fires were lit and the smell of something sweet filled the air, their idea of the enemy and of America would change forever. Morning broke over the Kansas plains like a promise no one quite trusted. The sun lifted above a horizon of gold, stretching its light over endless fields of corn that whispered in the wind. Inside the camp, the German women stirred from their bunks, half expecting the day to bring the cruelty they had been warned about. Instead, they woke to the smell of smoke and something sweet, an aroma so out of place in a prison camp that for a moment they thought they were dreaming. Outside, a plume of gentle gray rose from the mess hall chimneys. American soldiers moved between the fires, their sleeves rolled, voices calm and ordinary. The women lined up quietly, tin plates clutched to their chests. No one spoke. The air was alive with the sound of sizzling fat and laughter from the guards. They had never heard laughter in a prison yard before. A sergeant with a broad Texan accent barked, "Step up, ladies! Breakfast won't serve itself." The translator repeated his words in broken German. The women shuffled forward, still wary. The first woman reached the counter and froze. Before her lay a tray of corn on the cob, freshly grilled, edges blackened and brushed with something golden that glistened under the light. Beside it sat thick slices of bread and a small bowl of what looked like pale cream. One of the American cooks smiled. "Honey butter," he said, pointing to it. "Try it." The woman hesitated. Honey was a memory from before the war, a luxury that disappeared from German markets long before the bombing of Cologne. She looked at the guard, who nodded, urging her on. Slowly, she spread the butter across the warm bread. The smell was almost unbearable. Sweetness mixed with salt, a reminder of her mother's kitchen before ration cards and air raids. When she took the first bite, she began to cry. Not loud, not with drama, just a soft trembling that traveled down the line as others tasted it too. Word spread quickly among the women. The Americans were feeding them like guests, not prisoners. They were given milk, vegetables from nearby farms, and even small portions of meat once a week. The camp doctor, a calm man from Nebraska, insisted on daily vitamins. "You're no good, anyone half dead," he told them, though his tone carried more concern than authority. For the women, who had expected chains, such treatment was disorienting. By mid-morning, they were assigned to work details, tending gardens, sewing uniforms, helping in the kitchens. The Kansas soil was rich, warm beneath their bare hands. Some had once worked in bomb factories. Now they planted beans and corn under sky, so wide it made them dizzy. Across the fence, American farmers waved as they passed with tractors, their children riding along. The contrast was surreal. Families laughing in the same sunlight that shone on prisoners. In the evenings, guards and prisoners often found themselves listening to the same radio. The sound of swing music drifted through the camp. Benny Goodman, Glenn Miller, the soft static of freedom. A few of the women hummed along quietly. One of them, a 24-year-old former typist named Annalise, began to mimic the English word she heard. "Don't sit under the apple tree," she sang, her accent heavy but her smile genuine. An American corporal clapped from the gate and shouted, "Pretty good, Fräulein." She laughed for the first time in years. Not everyone outside the fence approved. Local newspapers reported with irritation that German POWs were eating better than citizens under ration. Town meetings debated whether kindness was misplaced. One letter to the editor asked, "Why give honey and corn to those who destroyed Europe?" But the War Department held firm. Under the Geneva Convention, prisoners were to be treated humanely, and in truth, the U.S. farms had surplus. Victory Gardens had produced more food than any year before. Feeding the enemy cost less than starving them. Still, the moral tension lingered. One afternoon, when the women carried baskets of corn from the field, a group of local teenagers shouted from the road, "Murderers!" The guard stepped forward, firm but silent. The women did not respond. One of them, an older nurse from Dresden, whispered to the others, "They have a right to hate us." Yet that night, the same nurse found herself handing a loaf of bread to an American cook who had dropped his rations. He smiled and said, "Thank you." The world was quietly rearranging itself in gestures that no treaty could measure. In time, the camp became a place of uneasy healing. The women gained weight, their faces rounding again. Laughter returned, first in whispers, then in bursts. They began to write diary entries permitted by the Red Cross. One wrote, "Today I tasted corn with honey butter. It was as if peace had a flavor." Another described the guards as stern but fair, marveling that no one beat them for mistakes. For many, the sweetness of food carried something symbolic, proof that not all enemies wished to see them suffer. But beneath that comfort ran a quieter conflict. Gratitude clashed with guilt. Could one feel thankful to the men whose bombs had destroyed their cities? Some women avoided eye contact with their guards, unwilling to accept kindness that felt undeserved. Others embraced it, eager to rebuild some fragment of humanity in themselves. At night, they debated softly whether the Americans' generosity was real or strategic, whether compassion could exist between enemies. The truth revealed itself not in speeches, but in small things. One morning, when the kitchen ran out of flour, an American guard offered his own ration coupons to replace it. Another day, a farmer's wife sent jars of honey labeled with her family name. For the girls, the note read, the women couldn't comprehend it. They had been raised on fear of Americans, monsters with flying machines. Now, they were tasting mercy from their hands. Summer deepened. Fireflies danced over the cornfields at dusk, and the camp fences seemed less menacing, the distance between captor and captive shrinking with every shared meal. One evening, the guards organized a small fair to boost morale. Music from a phonograph, a baseball game, and baskets of fresh corn grilled over open flame. The women watched as butter melted into the kernels, golden and fragrant. The cook passed plates through the wire. "Eat," he said. "You helped grow it." They did. That night, as the fires dimmed, the camp lay under a sky washed in amber. The women sat outside their barracks, talking in low voices. They spoke of their homes, their families, their disbelief that kindness could survive after such ruin. One said quietly, "They feed us as if they want us to remember this." Another replied, Maybe they want us to forget. But memory is stubborn. When the wind shifted, it carried the scent of grilled corn across the prairie and into the distance, toward the towns that still distrusted them, toward a Europe still starving, toward futures they could not yet imagine. They had come to America as prisoners of war. They were beginning, slowly and painfully, to feel like something else, witnesses to a world that could still choose compassion over conquest. Yet beyond the horizon, new orders were being written, and rumors whispered to the barracks of women soon to be sent home. None knew if home still existed, and as the sun set behind the barbed wire that evening, the honey butter cooling on half-eaten bread, one thought passed among them like a prayer. Perhaps this is what peace tastes like. Autumn crept gently over the Kansas plains, painting the fields in rust and gold. The mornings came cooler now, the air heavy with dew and the smell of turned soil. Within the camp, the rhythm of life had settled into something almost domestic. Wake-up whistle, roll call, work, and meals that no longer frightened the women with their generosity. Yet beneath that surface calm, something was shifting. The war outside had ended, but quieter struggle had begun inside each of them. How to live among the people they had been taught to hate. Letters had become the new battlefield. The Red Cross had finally authorized correspondence home, and suddenly the camp filled with paper and ink, with trembling hands clutching pencils like lifelines. Some women wrote cautiously, describing weather and health, omitting the sweetness of food or the kindness of guards, unsure how such truths would sound in the ruins of Germany. Others were bolder. "We eat corn with honey butter," one wrote. "It is strange, Mama. They feed us as if they want us to forgive them." A few never received replies. Their towns destroyed, their families scattered. Still they wrote. Writing became an act of survival. Annalise, the typist who sang English songs, spent her mornings in the mailroom. Her careful script drew praise from the American clerk, who teased her. "You write prettier than I do." She smiled shyly, but never forgot to sign her letters with "Your daughter, safe in America." It was half reassurance, half confession. Every envelope she sealed seemed to carry a piece of disbelief, that her safety came from the very army she once tracked across maps. The guards, too, had softened. Sergeant Harris, the tall Oklahoman, had started bringing newspapers to the women who could read English. "Figured you might like to know what's going on," he said one morning, sliding a copy of the Kansas City Star through the wire. The headline read, "Europe struggles to feed its children." The women stared at the photographs, skeletal boys, women queuing for bread, and felt the ache of contradiction. They were eating grilled corn while their country starved. That night, guilt sat heavier than hunger ever had. Not all prisoners accepted this uneasy peace. Greta, the former radio operator, refused to smile at the guards or touch American food. "They want to wash us clean," she said bitterly, as if kindness can undo what they did. Yet when she fell ill with fever, it was an American medic who sat by her cot through the night, changing cold cloths and whispering, "You're going to be fine." The next morning, she wept quietly into her pillow. "I don't know who the enemy is anymore," she confessed. Education classes began that winter. The War Department called it reorientation. The prisoners called it the Quiet War. In a makeshift classroom, a chaplain lectured on democracy, freedom, and forgiveness. A few listened politely. Others rolled their eyes. But the chaplain's words found strange echoes in the letters home. "Americans talk about conscience like it's a uniform," one woman wrote. "You wear it, and everyone can see who you are." Another observed, "They have no ruins. Maybe that is why they can afford kindness." The irony was not lost on anyone. Outside the camp, farmers came to trade labor. The women helped harvest wheat, mend fences, sort mail. One farmer's wife, a gentle woman named Eleanor, brought pies to the guards, and one slipped a slice through the fence to a young prisoner. "You remind me of my niece," she said softly. The girl stared, speechless, at the gift, warm, fragrant, impossible. That night she wrote in her diary, "Today I saw Mercy wearing an apron. Through small acts, the idea of enemy began to crumble. Shared work blurred the lines of war. When snow fell in December, guards and prisoners shoveled together, laughing at the absurdity of it. Even Harris joked, "Guess we're allies now." But beneath the laughter lingered an unease. Some guards still carried photographs of brothers lost in Normandy. Some women still dreamed of bomb shelters. Forgiveness came in fragments, never whole. Rumors of repatriation spread as the new year approached. The camp buzzed with questions. Will they go home soon? Would home even want them? Annalise worried aloud. "If I tell them how we were treated, they'll call me traitor." Greta answered quietly, "If you lie, you'll never sleep again." The choice between honesty and loyalty haunted every line they wrote. The Red Cross censored the letters, but not the emotions that seeped between words. One day, an American colonel visited to inspect the camp. The women lined up, standing straighter than they had in months. The colonel paused before them, hat tucked under his arm. "You have done good work here," he said through a translator. "We don't hold you responsible for what others did. You were caught in the same storm." His words were plain, but they carried a weight that silenced the yard. For the first time, the women felt recognized not as symbols of a defeated nation, but as people. That night, a storm rolled in from the west, thunder shaking the barracks. Rain hammered the tin roofs, and the women huddled near the stoves, talking softly. Someone asked, "Do you think they'll ever forgive us?" Another answered, "I think they already have." The conversation drifted to silence, broken only by the hiss of rain and the faint sound of a harmonica outside, the guards playing in the dark. It was a fragile music, rising and falling like breath between two sides that had run out of reasons to hate. Weeks later, the first snow melted, and with it came a delivery, a bundle of letters stamped from Europe. The women crowded around as names were called. Some cried at the sight of familiar handwriting. Others stood motionless, holding envelopes they dared not open. Annalise's letter was from her mother. "We are alive. The house is gone. Your brother is missing. Be grateful to those who feed you. God sends kindness in strange uniforms." She read it twice, then folded it carefully. For the first time, she smiled without guilt. The days grew longer. English phrases slipped into their speech. "Thank you, good morning, see you later." The guards joked that they'd start charging for lessons. At night, a few of the women gathered to practice writing in English. "Dear Mother," one began, "today I learned that the enemy has a face like mine." It was not a confession, but a revelation. Yet even as understanding deepened, the horizon darkened with uncertainty. Orders were coming down from Washington. The camps would soon close, and the prisoners sent home. The women sensed it before anyone spoke. Their laughter turned softer, their letters longer. Harris noticed and asked Annalise one evening, "You'll miss this place, won't you?" She didn't answer at once. Then she said quietly, "I'll miss remembering that kindness is possible." The wind shifted that night, carrying the scent of thawing earth and the distant smoke of spring fires. Somewhere beyond the barbed wire, trains were being prepared. The women did not know yet when they would leave or what they would return to, but they knew one thing. The world outside might never understand what had happened here. Behind fences built for war, they had rediscovered their humanity. And as dawn broke over Quiet Camp, a single American guard pinned a note to the gate. No enemies past this point. The women read it in silence, unsure whether it was a farewell or a warning. The last spring silence, unsure whether it was a farewell or a warning. The last spring of captivity came quietly, with wind that smelled of rain and fields that shimmered green as if the earth itself was ready to forgive. Camp Concordia no longer looked like a prison. The fences still stood, but they had become little more than lines against a vast Kansas sky. Birds nested on the watchtowers. The guards had grown sunburned and easygoing, the women softer, less haunted. Yet beneath the peace, everyone felt it, the waiting. Trains were being readied, names checked, departure lists printed. The war had ended years ago, but now came a harder ending, saying goodbye to the strange mercy that had kept them alive. Repatriation orders arrived in June 1946. The news spread to the barracks like a rumor at first, whispered, doubted, then accepted with tears that surprised even the ones who wept. For months they had dreamed of home, now they feared it. Some had no homes left. Cities like Hamburg and Dresden were rubble. families buried beneath the ruins. Others feared what waited behind the ruins: judgment. To have survived too well, to have eaten American food, could mark them as collaborators. "What will we tell them?" one woman asked. "That the enemy taught us kindness?" The Americans avoided sentiment, at least at first. "Pack your things," Sergeant Harris told them briskly. "Trains leave Friday." But his voice caught when a few women handed him small gifts: a hand-sewn scarf, a carved wooden cross, a folded note that simply read "Thank you." He didn't open it until later, when the barracks were empty. Inside was a scrap of paper that said, "You made peace possible." On the morning of departure, the women gathered in the yard with suitcases built from scrap wood and twine. The camp loudspeaker crackled one last time, calling roll. The sun rose heavy and orange, catching the dew on the barbed wire like glass beads. Some prayed softly. Others stared at the ground, their faces pale with the weight of leaving. Annalise stood near the front, her hair tied neatly under a borrowed scarf. She held a tin of something wrapped in cloth, a parting gift from the camp kitchen. The trucks rumbled to life. As the first one pulled away, Harris climbed onto the running board and shouted, "You ladies take care of yourselves." It drew nervous laughter, but most were too choked to reply. Then, from the kitchen steps, a familiar voice called, "Wait!" It was the camp cook, a broad-shouldered man in a flour-stained apron. He carried a crate of warm corn and small jars of honey butter. "One last meal before you go," he said, "for the road." The guards helped pass the food through the truck windows. The women cupped the ears of corn in their hands as if they were holding gold. The butter melted instantly under the rising heat, releasing that sweet, unmistakable scent: sugar, salt, smoke, and sunlight. Silence fell as they ate. The taste was almost unbearable, too rich with memory. Some smiled through tears. Others chewed slowly, as though memorizing every flavor. For a few minutes, the fences, the guards, the orders, all of it vanished. There were only human beings sharing a simple meal in the open air. One woman whispered, "This is how war should end, with bread, not blood." Harris overheard and nodded quietly. "Maybe one day they will," he said. The convoy moved east toward New Orleans, where ships waited to carry them home. The landscape changed from golden plains to dense green forests, from silence to the hum of towns and cities. Along the way, Americans waved at the passing trucks, unaware that inside sat former enemies clutching the taste of their forgiveness. In the camp kitchens they left behind, the cooks scrubbed the stoves clean, muttering about the strange quiet that followed the women's departure. At the port, the women were processed once more. Fingerprints, photographs, final health checks. For the first time in years, they were no longer prisoners, but passengers. The U.S. officers handed out small envelopes containing letters written by guards and chaplains. Some were signed with full names, others simply with initials. One note read, "May you build something kinder than what we destroyed." Another said, "Tell them we fed you because you deserve to live, not because you surrendered." As they boarded the ships, the women looked back at the city skyline, America's final silhouette. Annalise leaned against the railing, watching the water churn. In her pocket, she kept a piece of cornbread wrapped in wax paper. She couldn't bring herself to eat it. She only wanted to remember that it existed, that in the middle of the world's cruelty, something good had been given freely. The voyage home was long and restless. At night, they gathered on deck under a canopy of stars, speaking softly in German about the people who had changed them. One said she wanted to open a bakery. Another planned to teach English to children. "We cannot bring back the dead," Annalise said, "but maybe we can bake for the living." The others nodded. No speeches, no grand vows, just small, steady promises born of butter and corn. When the ships reached Bremerhaven, the women were met not by celebration but by silence. The docks were gray, the air cold. Allied officials processed them quickly, stamping papers and issuing rations. They were free, but invisible, returned to a homeland that didn't quite know what to do with them. Some families embraced them. Others turned away, unable to understand their stories. A few women found themselves whispering apologies for having survived too easily. Yet all of them carried something that no one could take, a memory that lived in the senses, not in the mind. In the months that followed, letters began arriving in America. They came from Germany, written in halting English, postmarked from ruins and rebuilt towns. One reached Camp Concordia addressed simply, "To the cooks who gave us honey butter." The letter read, "You taught us that decency is stronger than hate. When we eat corn, we remember." The words passed quietly among the former guards, who didn't know whether to smile or cry. Time moved on. The camp closed, its barracks dismantled, its fences sold for scrap. The prairie reclaimed the land. Only the wind remained, carrying whispers of the past across the fields. Travelers passing through Kansas decades later would find nothing there but corn and sky. Yet, if one stood still long enough, the air still smelled faintly of smoke, butter, and forgiveness. The story of those women was never written into official history. No medals were given, no monuments built. But sometimes, the truest victories leave no footprints, only the lingering taste of mercy. They came as enemies and left as witnesses, proof that compassion can outlive the hatred that started wars. And somewhere in a rebuilt kitchen in post-war Germany, Annalise spread honey butter across a loaf of fresh bread and watched her daughter taste it for the first time. "What is it?" the child asked. Annalise smiled softly. "It's peace," she said. "The past never entirely ends. It lingers in flavors, in gestures, in the quiet decisions that rebuild the soul of a broken world." The Germans had surrendered once with arms raised. Now they surrendered again, with open hearts. And as the Kansas sun dipped behind the horizon thousands of miles away, its light seemed to stretch across the ocean, gilding a loaf of bread, a child's smile, and the final truth that history too often forgets. Wars end not when treaties are signed, but when kindness tastes sweeter than vengeance.